"Strike it," she said, "now, while there is still light to see it come down." I have kept the colors of this house for 41 years, and in all that time no one had ever given me an order like that one. Not the way she gave it, standing at the foot of the Colour Stair in the Queen's Tower with her gloves off and her chin lifted, pointing up the long twist of stone toward the standard that flew above us all. I was an old man even then, and old men remember weather and voices better than dates. I remember that the wind that afternoon came from the north and smelled of the river, and that the standard of the late Queen Isolde snapped once, hard, against its staff, a green field, a white hart, a border of small gold stars, as if it had heard her and disagreed. I remember, too, that the man she gave the order to did not move. His name was Corwin Ashe. He held the post at the top of the Colour Stair, which is the narrow landing where the flag lines are made fast, where the keeper's work and the guard's work meet, and where by the oldest arrangement in this palace, no hand touches a royal standard without both the keeper's leave and the guard's watch. I had trained beside a dozen men who stood that post over the years. Most were good. Ashe was the best of them, and not because he was quick or clever. He was neither particularly. He was the best because he had understood, young, the single thing the post is for, that a color is not cloth. It is a word made visible. Lower the wrong one at the wrong hour and you have not moved a flag. You have told a lie to the whole city, and the city will believe it, because a color does not lie. So when Queen Consort Morwenna stood at the bottom of the stair and told him to strike the late Queen's standard, Corwin Ashe looked at her, and looked up at the green field snapping in the north wind, and then he said the first version of the thing that, before the season turned, every soul in this palace would be able to recite. "That standard flies by the king's word, my lady," he said. "It comes down by the king's word, not by mine and not by yours. I should say, before I go on, who I am, so that you will know why I stood at the bottom of that stair too, and why my hands were shaking when I did. I am Pelham Rook, keeper of the colors of the royal house of Harrogate. It is not a grand office. I have no seat at the council and no ribbon at my throat. What I have is a locked room under the leads full of folded standards, a ledger that goes back 9 reigns, and the sole responsibility under the king for which color flies over which tower and at what height on any day of the year. When a prince is born, I raise the birth flag. When a treaty is signed, I raise the peace color beside the realms. When someone we love dies, it is my hands and the guard's watch that bring the great standard down to the half and hold it there through the morning. I know the weight of every color in that room by the ache it leaves in my shoulders. And I knew, better than anyone alive that afternoon, exactly what law governed the green field with the white hart, because I had stood in the cold at the graveside 2 years before and heard the king himself lay that law down. Queen Isolde had been the king's first wife, and if I may be permitted an old servant's opinion, the finest of the 4 sovereigns and consorts I have served under. She was the mother of Crown Prince Rowan, who will be king one day, and of Princess Alara, who was then a grave and clever girl on the edge of womanhood. Isolde died of a fever that took her in 11 days, faster than any of us could believe, and the whole realm went into black for her. On the morning of her burial, when the mourning term ended, and I climbed to strike her personal standard from the Queen's Tower for the last time, for that is the custom, the personal color comes down when the earth closes, King Alaric stopped me. He was not a man who spoke much in grief. He put one hand flat against the folded flag in my arms, the way you might put a hand on a horse to steady it, and he said, in front of the herald, the chancellor, and the assembled guard, that Isolde's standard would not come down at the burial as custom required. It would fly over the Queen's Tower, at full height, until their daughter, Isolde's daughter, Alara, came of age and was invested with her mother's honors and her mother's rooms. Let the tower keep her color, he said, until it can be handed to the one child of her body who has the right to it. On that day, and not before, it comes down into my hand, or none. The chancellor wrote it as an ordinance. The herald cried it at the gate. I copied it into my ledger in my own hand, and I sealed the fair copy into the roll of colors with the king's seal pressed into green wax, because green was her color, and I am sentimental, and no one told me not to. That was the law Corwin Ashe was standing on when he refused the Queen Consort. It was not stubbornness. It was not sentiment, though he had his share of that. It was the ordinance, letter for letter. The color comes down to the king's own hand, on the day of Ilara's investiture, and on no other day by no other hand. Morwenna had come to the throne a year after Isolde was buried. I will try to be fair to her, because an old man who tells only one side is worse than a liar. She was clever, and she was handsome in a hard, bright way, and she was not, whatever the city later said, a fool. She had brought 2 grown children of her own into the palace, Lord Cassius, who was quick to take offense and slow to forgive it, and Lady Verena, who watched everything and said little. What Morwenna could not abide, and I think could not even understand, was that dead woman's flag over her tower. For it had become her tower. The Queen's tower is the consort's residence. Morwenna lived in it, dressed in it, gave her audiences in it. And over her roof, at full height in the north wind, flew the green field, and the white hart of the woman she had replaced flew higher than her own arms, which by custom hung at the lesser height on the lesser staff. Every visiting envoy who looked up at the Queen's tower saw Isolde first. Every citizen crossing the forecourt read the same sentence in cloth. This is still, in the ways that matter, her house. I do not doubt it galled her every single day. And on the afternoon I am telling you about, she had at last decided to end it. She had chosen her hour with care. The king was not in the palace. He had ridden 6 days before to the eastern border, where an old dispute over a river crossing had turned sharp, and he was not expected back for a fortnight or more. In his absence, the realm was not left masterless. The king's sister, Princess Adela, held the Regency Commission, sealed and lawful, as she had done twice before when her brother went to war. But Adela kept to the old court across the gardens and did not meddle in the Queen's tower, and Morwenna had persuaded herself, I think, that a flag was too small a thing for a regent to trouble over. A flag was a household matter, and the household in the king's absence answered to the king's wife. So she came to the Colour Stair with her son Cassius a pace behind her and 2 footmen behind him, and she gave her order to the one man in the palace whose whole purpose was to refuse it. "You forget yourself," she told Ashe when his words had settled. Her voice did not rise. That was the frightening thing about Morwenna. The angrier she was, the quieter she spoke, so that you leaned in to hear your own sentence. "I am the Queen. That is my tower. And I am telling you to take that rag off my roof before the sun sets on it one more time." "It is not a rag, my lady," Ashe said. "It is the standard of Queen Isolde, and it flies by an ordinance the king spoke aloud at her grave. I heard him." The keeper heard him. He did not look at me, but I felt the whole weight of the moment shift onto my old shoulders, and I made myself speak. "It is in the roll, your majesty," I said. "Under the king's own seal. The color of Queen Isolde flies until the Princess Ilara is invested. It comes down on that day to the king's hand, and no sooner." "Then bring me the roll," Morwenna said, still quiet, "and I will read it, and I will find the line in it that says a dead woman outranks a living queen." She turned back to Ashe. "Or you will save us all the trouble, guardsmen, and climb those stairs, and do the small thing I have asked, and we will none of us speak of it again." I want you to understand what she was offering him, because the whole of the story turns on his refusing it. She was not in that moment threatening him. She was offering him a way to be reasonable. Climb the stairs, untie a line, fold a flag. It would take 4 minutes. No blood, no scene, no ruin, only a small obedience to the most powerful woman in the palace, the kind of small obedience that oils every court in the world. Half the men I have known would have done it and told themselves it was not their place to argue with a queen, and they would not even have been wrong about their place. It was not his place to argue. It was his place to refuse. That is a different thing, and Corwin Ashe was one of the few men I have ever met who knew the difference in his bones. "My lady," he said, "I have stood this post 9 years. In that time I have raised the birth color for 3 of the king's grandchildren, and lowered the great standard to the half for 2 friends of mine who died in the king's service. I have never once raised or lowered a color, except by the law that governs it and the leave of the keeper who holds it. If the king commands that standard down, it comes down within the hour, and I will carry it to him folded on my own arms. If the Princess Alara is invested, it comes down that day with every honor, and I will count it the proudest work of my life. But you have given me neither the king's word nor the law's day. You have given me your temper. And I will not strike a queen's color for a temper, not yours, my lady, and not any man's alive." Cassius took a step forward at that, his hand going to the little jeweled thing at his belt that a court dandy calls a sword, and I confess my heart went sideways in my chest. But Morwenna lifted 2 fingers without looking back, and he stopped like a dog on a chain. She studied Ashe for a long moment. The wind pulled the standard taut above us. The white hart seemed to leap against the green. And then she smiled, and it was not a warm smile, and she said the thing that told me this would not end at the foot of a stair. "You are a careful man, guardsman," she said. "I admire care, so let me be careful too. You have refused me because you say I have brought you neither the king's word nor the law's day. Very well, I will bring you both." She drew her gloves back on, finger by finger, unhurried. "By the time I come back to this stair, you will have no ordinance to hide behind and no leave to wait for. And then we will see whether it was the law you loved, guardsman, or only the pleasure of telling a queen no." She turned and went, Cassius and the footmen wheeling after her, and the sound of her going down the tower stairs was very soft, which was worse than if she had slammed a door. Ashe let out a slow breath. Then he looked at me, and for just a moment the post fell away, and he was only a tired man of 34 who had made a powerful enemy on a windy afternoon. "Keeper," he said, "is it truly in the roll, under seal?" "It is," I told him. "I sealed it myself." "Then guard it," he said, "because I think, before this is done, that roll is the only thing standing between that color and the ground." I did not know yet how right he was. I only knew that the north wind was rising, and that the green field of Queen Isolde flew above us at full height, snapping and bright, the way it had flown every day for 2 years, and that a woman who was very clever and very patient had just promised to bring it down. I climbed to my locked room under the leads that evening and took the roll of colors out of its case, and I read the ordinance over by candle, letter for letter, the way Ashe had spoken it. It was exactly as I remembered. The color of Isolde, queen, flies at full over the queen's tower until the investiture of her daughter Alara. On that day it is lowered to the king's hand. By no other hand and on no other day is it to be struck. Signed with the king's name. Sealed in green wax with the king's own seal. I sat a long time with it open on my knees. I am an old man and not a brave one. I have spent my life folding cloth and climbing stairs and keeping out of the way of great people's quarrels, and here was the greatest quarrel of my life laid across my lap, and a single sheet of vellum the only weapon in it. I thought about locking the roll away where no one could reach it. I thought about carrying it to Princess Adela in the old court that very night and putting the whole affair in the regent's hands, where it belonged. I did neither that first night, and I have had 2 years since to wonder whether I was a coward or only slow. In the end, I put the roll back in its case, and locked the case, and locked the room, and hung the key where it had hung for 41 years, and told myself that a thing sealed by the king was safe. I was wrong about that, as you will hear. But I was right about one thing, and I want to set it down plainly before I go further, because it is the truest thing I know about that whole terrible season. Corwin Ashe was not a stubborn man. He was an obedient one. He had simply understood, before the rest of us, that there is a kind of obedience that looks like defiance. The obedience a man owes not to the person in front of him, but to the word he swore behind him. and that when the two come into conflict on a windy afternoon at the foot of a stair, a guard worth the name does not obey the person. He obeys the oath. The first thing Morwenna did was the thing I least expected, and it taught me more about her than any threat could have. She did not send soldiers. She did not go to the regent. She sent a clerk. He came to the Colour Stair the next morning with a leather case under his arm and an apology on his face. A thin, nervous man from the household office named Osric, who I had known for years as a decent sort caught permanently between orders. He climbed to Ashe's landing, and I climbed after him, because by then I had decided that wherever this quarrel went, the keeper of the colours would be standing next to it. "Guardsman Ashe," Osric said, and cleared his throat and read from a paper. "By direction of the Queen's household, and for the good order and repair of the Queen's tower, the standard now flying at the upper staff is to be struck and taken down for inspection and cleaning, the fabric being weathered and the halyard being worn. You are directed to render assistance to the keeper of the colours in this ordinary maintenance. Signed, the controller of the Queen's household." It was cleverly done. There was no order to destroy the colour, no insult to the dead Queen, nothing a man could point at and call unlawful. Only a small domestic instruction about a worn rope and weathered cloth, the sort of instruction I received a dozen times a year and obeyed without a second thought. Take the flag down for cleaning. Everyone knew that a flag once down for cleaning could stay down a very long time, and that a different flag could go up in its place while the first was being repaired, and that by the time the king came home from the border, the whole city would have grown used to the change, and no one would think to question it. It was not a demand. It was a slow erasure dressed as housekeeping. And it put me squarely in the trap, because the order was addressed to me. The cleaning of colours is the keeper's work. If I said the halyard was worn, it was worn. If I said the fabric needed taking in, it needed taking in. Morwenna had understood the arrangement of the Colour Stair better than I gave her credit for. She could not make the guard strike the flag. But if she could make the keeper call for it, the guard's watch would have nothing to watch over. Ashe could refuse a queen. He could not refuse me, his own keeper, asking for a colour in the ordinary way of the work. Osric held the paper out to me. "It only wants your word, keeper," he said, not unkindly, "that the halyard's worn, and we'll have it down before noon and no more trouble to anyone." I looked at the halyard. It was 3 years old and sound as the day I rove it. I looked at the green field snapping overhead in a wind that had swung round to the west. I looked at Corwin Ashe, who was watching me with a stillness that was not judgment. He would not have judged me. That was not in him, but that was somehow harder to bear than judgment, because it was trust. And I found, to my own great surprise, that I was not going to do it. "The halyard is not worn," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I rove it myself with new line the spring before last. The fabric is a service standard, made to fly 3 years in weather without a mark, and it has flown too. There is nothing to clean and nothing to repair. Tell the controller that the keeper of the colours has inspected the upper staff of the Queen's tower and finds it in good order, and that the colour flying there does so by the King's ordinance and will not be struck for maintenance it does not need." I made myself add the rest, because a half-truth is worse than a whole one. "And tell him I know why he was made to write that paper, and that I am ashamed for him, and that he should be ashamed too." Osric went white, then red. He folded his paper very carefully as if it might break, and he said, "I'll carry your word, keeper," and he went, and I stood there with my heart going like a boy's and thought, well, now there are 2 of us. Ashe said quietly, "You did not have to do that, keeper." "No," I said, "I did not. That is rather the point, isn't it?" And he almost smiled, and we said no more about it, and I went back to my room under the leads and was sick to my stomach with fear for an hour, and then felt better than I had felt in 20 years. Morwenna's answer to that came within 2 days, and it was not a clerk. It was her son. Lord Cassius came to the Colour Stair in the late afternoon with 4 of the Queen's Tower footmen at his back, big men, chosen for their shoulders, dressed as servants but standing like something else. And he did not read a paper, because Cassius was not a man for papers. He was a man for having his own way in a room and enjoying it. He came up the tower stairs 2 at a time and stood on Ashe's landing with his thumbs in his belt and looked the guardsman up and down as though pricing him. "You've upset my mother," he said. "That takes doing. Most men are too sensible." He nodded up toward the flag lines. "It's a rope and a piece of cloth, guardsman. You'll come off that post one day, next month, next year, and some other fellow will stand it. And one afternoon my mother will ask him nicely and he'll say, 'Yes, Your Majesty,' and the flag will come down and the sky won't fall and the king won't so much as notice. All you're doing is making sure that when it comes down, and it is coming down, friend, it is a certainty. It is a fact of the world it comes down with your name written on the wrong side of it. Think about that. You could be the man who did the sensible thing, or you could be the man who was in the way when it happened anyway." It was, I have to admit, a good argument. It was the argument the world always makes to a man who stands on a principle, that principles do not hold and the tide comes in regardless, so why get your boots wet refusing it? I have heard it made to better men than me, and I have seen it win more often than not. Ashe heard him out. Then he said, "You may be right, my lord. Some other man may stand this post one day and strike that color for a kind word from a queen. If he does, that will be his shame, and he will have to carry it up these stairs every morning the way I carry my honor up them. But I am the man standing this post today, and today the standard flies by the king's ordinance. What some other man does on some other day is not mine to answer for. Today is. And today, my lord, it stays up." "Today," Cassius repeated, and he smiled, and it was his mother's smile, cold and pleased. "You keep saying today, guardsman, as if there'll always be another one, but posts change, rosters change. A word in the right ear and you're standing the coal gate on the riverside at midnight and some biddable lad is standing here in the sunshine and my mother is asking him nicely." He leaned in. "You're not guarding a flag, you're guarding a chair you're about to be moved out of. Enjoy the view while you have it." And that was the tear that frightened me, because it was true, and because it was the first time anyone had said aloud the simple mechanism by which Morwenna would win. She did not need to defeat Corwin Ashe. She only needed to move him. The post was the king's, the ordinance was the king's, but the roster who stood which post on which watch was a household matter, and the household in the king's absence answered to the queen. She could not make Ashe strike the flag. She could make sure Ashe was 3 towers away in the dark at the hour it came down. There was one more move before the roster, and it was the cleverest of all, and it is the one Ashe told me of himself, because I was not there to see it. That same evening a page came to the guard hall and summoned guardsman Ashe to the Queen's privy chamber, not to be threatened, but to be received. Morwenna had understood by then that she could not frighten the man and could not outclerk him, and so she tried the last door, which is the one that has opened more good men than fear ever did. She tried kindness. She tried reward. She received him alone but for a single lady, with wine poured and a chair set for him, and she did not once mention the flag at first. She spoke of his service. She had made inquiries, she said. She knew his record, knew he had been passed over twice for the captaincy of the Queen's Tower, a captaincy that carried a captain's pay and quarters, and a captain's pension for his old age, the sort of provision a guardsman on 11 shillings a week dreams of and rarely sees. It happened, she said, that the captaincy was again vacant. It happened that the appointment lay within her gift as mistress of the Tower, and it happened that she thought Corwin Ashe exactly the steady, disciplined, respected man the post wanted. She would be glad, she would be honored to give it to him. And then, only then, when the offer was sitting warm in the room between them, she came to the flag. And was it not the case, she asked gently, that a captain of the Tower, a man of judgment, might see that a morning color flown 2 years was grief enough, and might himself, of his own free wisdom, advise that it be brought down with all honor, not as an order, as the considered judgment of a captain she trusted. It was, Ashe told me, the hardest hour of the whole affair, and he did not pretend otherwise. A threat you can lean against, keeper, he said. It pushes and you push back, and the pushing tells you where you stand. But a kindness pulls, and a pull is harder because part of you wants to go. I am not a rich man. I have no captaincy and no pension, and I am not young. She was not offering me a bribe with dirty hands. She was offering me a good post I had honestly earned, and asking me only to use my own judgment about a flag, and half of me stood there in that warm room and thought, it is only a flag, and it is a real captaincy, and who would even blame you? What did you say? I asked him. I thanked her, he said. For the honor, truly it was an honor, and I meant it. And then I told her that a captain of the Tower who bought his captaincy by striking a king's ordinance would not be a captain worth the name, and would know it every morning he climbed the stair, and that I would rather stand a coal gate an honest guardsman than command a tower a bought one. And I told her the post she was offering me was the very reason I could not do the thing she wanted, because a captain's whole worth is that his judgment can't be purchased, and the moment I sold mine for the captaincy wasn't worth having. And I gave her back her chair and thanked her again, and went down to the hall, and I will tell you honestly, keeper, that my legs were not steady on the stairs, because I had just talked myself out of the only comfortable old age I was ever likely to be offered. I have thought about that hour many times since, the warm room, the wine, the honest reward, the one small reasonable judgment asked in return. It is easy to stand against a villain with a raised hand. It is a far rarer thing to stand against a good offer honestly made, when no one would blame you for taking it, and the only witness to your refusal is yourself. Fear had not moved him, and reward had not moved him, and by the end of that evening Morwenna had learned the thing about Corwin Ashe that the rest of us already knew, and that she could not forgive, that there was no handle on him. You could not push him, and you could not pull him. There was nothing to take hold of but the oath, and the oath did not have a price, and a woman who has spent her life learning where every man's price is hidden finds nothing so intolerable as a man who has none. So she stopped trying to move the man and moved the roster instead, which is what small clever people do when they cannot buy a soul. They take away the ground it is standing on. I did not sleep that night. I sat up in my room under the leads with the roll of colors locked in its case beside me and thought about what a single sheet of vellum can and cannot do. It can prove a law. It cannot enforce one. It cannot climb a stair and stand a post. If Morwenna moved Ashe off the Colour Stair and put a frightened boy of 19 on it, the ordinance would still be true, and it would still be sealed in green wax, and the boy would still strike the flag when the Queen asked him nicely, because he would have a mother of his own somewhere who needed his wage. And by the time the king rode home and learned of it, the green field of Isolde would have been folded away in my own storeroom for a fortnight, and Morwenna's arms would be flying alone over the Queen's tower, and the city would have read the new sentence and believed it, because a color does not lie. So the next morning, old coward that I am, I did the thing I should have done on the first night. I put the roll of colors under my coat, and I crossed the frozen gardens to the old court, and I asked to see the regent. Princess Adela received me in a plain room with a cold hearth, because she was a plain woman who did not waste firewood on herself when the king was away and the treasury was watching. She was the king's elder sister, unmarried, straight-backed, with a face like her brother's cut in harder stone. She had governed the realm twice while Alaric was at war and given it back both times without a mark on it, which is a rarer thing in a regent than you might think. She listened to me tell the whole of it, the afternoon at the stair, the clerk and his worn halyard, Cassius and his roster, without once interrupting, her hands folded on the table, and when I had finished she was quiet for so long that I thought I had wasted her morning. Then she said, "Show me the roll." I laid it open on the table. She read the ordinance twice, slowly, her finger under the line the way a careful reader does. She looked at the king's seal and the green wax. And she said in a voice with no warmth in it and a great deal of iron, "My brother spoke these words at the graveside. I stood 4 feet from him. He meant them as a law, and the chancellor wrote them as a law, and a law they are." She closed the roll. "The Queen Consort may not strike this color, neither may her son, nor her controller, nor any hand in the Queen's household. It comes down to the king on the day of Ilara's investiture, and on no day before. That is the ordinance, and while I hold the regency, the ordinance holds." I felt the whole weight of the winter lift off me. "Then your highness will order the color protected," I said. And Guardsman Ashe kept at his post. And here Adela did the thing that great and honest people sometimes do that lesser people cannot forgive them for. She told me the truth instead of what I wanted to hear. "I will protect the color," she said, "but I will not touch the roster." I must have looked stricken because her hard face softened by the smallest degree. "Keeper, listen to me, because you will not like it and you must understand it anyway. The regency is a narrow commission. My brother gave me the realm's defense and the realm's law while he is gone, not his wife's household. The moment I reach into the Queen's tower and start naming which guardsman stands which post, I have made the regency into a weapon against the consort, and I have handed Morwenna the one true grievance she does not yet have, that the king's sister used a war commission to settle a family quarrel behind the king's back. She would carry that to my brother the day he rode in, and she would be right to. I will not give her that. The law I can hold. The roster I will not seize. If I seize it, I lose the very thing that makes the law worth holding, that it stands above our tempers, and not in service of them." "Then she will simply move Ashe," I said, "and the law will be true and the flag will still come down." "Perhaps," said Adela. "Or perhaps your guardsman is a better man than the mechanism, and the mechanism is not the only thing in the world." She stood, which meant I was dismissed. "Keep the roll safe. Keep it where she cannot reach it and where I can find it. And tell your Ashe that the regent has read the ordinance and finds it good, so that when his hour comes, and it will come, he knows he does not stand alone, even if he stands last." I went back across the gardens with the roll under my coat and Adela's cold honesty sitting in my chest like a stone. She was right, and being right did not help. The law was safe. The flag was not. Everything now hung on whether one guardsman could be kept on one stair, and that, the one thing that mattered, was the one thing the regent had just told me she would not, and could not, protect. That evening the new roster was posted in the guard hall. I heard of it before I saw it, the way you always hear of bad weather before it reaches you. Corwin Ashe was taken off the Colour Stair of the Queen's Tower, effective the coming dawn, and assigned to the River Colgate, the loneliest, coldest, most nothing post in the whole palace, exactly as Cassius had promised. And a boy of 19 named Tam Wren, 6 months in the guard, with a widowed mother in the lower town and a wage he could not afford to lose, was posted to the Colour Stair in his place. Morwenna had not defeated the law. She had simply gone around it. And at dawn, the only man standing between the green field of Queen Isolde and my dark storeroom would be a frightened boy who had never in his life said no to anyone who could hurt his mother. I found Ashe that night in the guard hall, cleaning his kit for a post he would not stand. He had heard, of course. He took the news the way he took most things, without heat, folding a white glove along its old creases, but I saw that his hands were slower than usual, and I understood that even a man like Corwin Ashe grieves a post the way another man grieves a house. "They've given the stair to Tam Wren," he said. "I know. He's a good lad. He'll do it, keeper, not because he's weak. Because he's got a mother in the lower town and 11 shillings a week and no one to tell him he's allowed to say no to a queen." He set the glove down. "That's the cruel cleverness of it. She's not asking a man who can afford to refuse. She's asking one who can't. And when he strikes the flag, she'll have him say it was his own hand did it freely, and he'll say it, because by then he'll believe he had no choice, and a boy who believes that will believe it for the rest of his life. He looked up at me. I could bear the flag coming down, keeper. I've made my peace with the fact that I can't stop a queen who's decided. What I can't bear is her doing it through a boy and calling it his fault. That's not taking a flag. That's taking a boy. I sat down across from him, and because it was late and we were both afraid, he told me a thing he had never told me before, and I will set it down because it is the reason he was the man he was, and because he is not here to tell it himself. He had been a boy of that same age, 19, 6 months in the guard. The winter queen Isolde fell ill. He had stood the night watch outside her sick room in the last week, when the fever was on her and the whole tower went about on tiptoe. And on one of those nights the physicians had wanted to try a thing, a harsh thing, a bleeding, that the old doctor swore by and the young queen dreaded. And Isolde, weak as she was, had asked the boy at her door to fetch her husband before they did it, because she wanted to refuse it and did not trust herself to be brave enough alone. And a senior man, a steward, had told the boy to stay at his post and not to trouble the king at that hour, that it was not a guardsman's place to carry a sick woman's fancies to the king's bedchamber in the small hours. And I stayed, Ashe said, because I was 19 and he was a steward, and I thought obeying the man in front of me was the same as doing my duty. So I stood my post like a good boy, and they bled her, and it did no good, and she died 4 nights later. I don't say the bleeding killed her. The fever killed her. But she asked me for the one thing she wanted at the end, to have her husband called so she could be brave, and a man told me to say no, and I said no, and I have stood every post since then, knowing the difference between obeying an oath and obeying the loudest person in the room. I learned it too late for her. I don't intend to unlearn it for her flag. We sat a while with that. Then Ashe stood and put his kit away, and said he would go and stand his coal gate at the river in the morning like a soldier, because that was the lawful order, and he would not disgrace the ordinance by defying a roster the way Morwenna defied a law. If I break the small rule to keep the big one, he said, I'm no better than she is. I'll go to the coal gate, but keep her go and see the boy tonight, not to tell him what to do. Just so that in the morning, when they ask him, there's one voice in his head that told him the truth. So I did. I went and found Tam Wren in the guard dormitory, a long-limbed nervous lad with his mother's letters folded under his pillow, and I did not tell him to defy the queen. I had no right to hand a boy a burden that would cost him his wage and his mother's rent. I only told him the truth of the thing, plainly, the way Adela had told me hers, that the flag over the queen's tower flew by the king's own ordinance, sealed in green wax, and that anyone who struck it without the king's word or the law's day would be breaking a royal law, whoever told them to, and that no order from the queen's household could make that lawful, and that he should know that in the morning, so that whatever he chose it with his eyes open. And then, because he was 19 and terrified, and it seemed a cruelty to leave him only with the law, I told him what Ashe had told me, that a man who obeys the loudest person in the room instead of the oath he swore carries it a long time. And I left him to his night, as someone had once left Ashe to his, and I did not sleep, thinking I had probably ruined a good boy's life for a piece of cloth. The dawn came gray and hard with frost, and that was the morning the whole shape of the thing changed, because Morwenna, who was cleverer than any of us, had not been idle either. She had gone in those 2 days and got herself a law. Not a real one, but something that looked enough like one to fool a boy in half the court. She had gone to the controller and the household lawyers and had them draw up an instrument, a grand thing, 3 seals and a ribbon, that recited the king's absence, and the consort's authority over her own household in that absence, and declared that, for the dignity and good order of the queen's residence, the consort was empowered to regulate all standards, colors, and devices flying upon the queen's tower, and directed the guard on the Colour Stair to give effect to the consort's instructions in that regard. It was nonsense in law, A household controller cannot overturn a king's sealed ordinance, and no amount of ribbon changes that, but it did not need to be good law. It needed to look like law to a 19-year-old at dawn with his mother's rent in his mind. It had seals. It had a ribbon. It said the queen was allowed. And Morwenna meant to carry it up the Colour Stair herself, in front of witnesses she had chosen, and hand it to Tam Wren, and have him strike the flag, in accordance with the lawful instrument of the household. So that when the king came home there would be a paper, and a boy's own hand on the halyard, and the whole thing would wear the costume of legality. That was the true danger, and I did not understand it until I saw the instrument later. Up to that morning, Morwenna had been a queen in a temper going around a law. Now she was a queen with a paper, and a paper changes everything because most people cannot tell a real law from a false one. They can only count the seals. If she struck the flag by open force, the king would be angry. If she struck it by a document that looked lawful, handed to a willing boy, the king might come home to find it a settled thing done by the book, and no man wants to unsettle a thing that is already done and papered and a fortnight old. She had found the one road that led around Adela's iron and Ashe's oath and my green wax all at once. And she took it at the dawn muster, in front of everyone, the way you do a thing you mean to make permanent. The dawn muster in the forecourt of the Queen's Tower is a small daily ceremony, the changing of the tower watch, a dozen guardsmen wheeling and stamping in the gray light while the household hurries past to its work. It is nothing, most mornings, but that morning the forecourt was full. Morwenna had seen to it. She had let it be known that the Queen would attend the muster, and that there would be a matter of the tower's dignity to witness. And so the galleries above the forecourt were lined with the household, stewards, ladies, envoys who had heard there was something to see, and a scattering of the lower town who had drifted up to the gates, because a crowd draws a crowd. Lady Verena stood at a high window with her cool, watching face. Lord Cassius stood at the foot of the Colour Stair with his footmen, guarding the base of it, so that no one should climb up and interfere before the thing was done. And up at the top of the stair, on the landing where Corwin Ashe had stood for 9 years, stood Tam Wren, 19 years old, white as the frost, with the halyard of Queen Isolde's standard in his 2 hands. I had come down from my room under the leads and pushed through to the front of the crowd, the roll of colors locked in its case and left behind. I dared not carry it into that crush, and I have wondered since whether that was cowardice or sense. From the forecourt you could see the whole height of it, the green field snapping at the upper staff against a hard white sky, the boy small beneath it, the crowd's breath smoking in the cold. And then a stir at the tower door, and Morwenna came out. She was dressed for it. That is a thing people forget about her. She understood spectacle the way I understand cloth. She wore the deep blue of her own house, and her own arms were embroidered small at her breast, and she carried nothing in her hands, because a queen does not carry her own papers. The controller carried the instrument behind her, the 3 seals swinging on their ribbon, and a herald walked before her, and she crossed the forecourt through the parting crowd and stopped at the foot of the Colour Stair, below her son, and looked up the long twist of stone at the frightened boy and the dead woman's flag, and she let the silence stretch until it hurt. Then she spoke, and she pitched her voice to carry, because this was for the galleries and the gate and the whole city beyond it. For 2 years, she said, this tower, the Queen's Tower, my residence and my charge, has flown a morning color at its full height. We have honored it, we have grieved beneath it. But mourning has its season, and its season ends, and a house of the living cannot fly the flag of the dead forever, or it is not a house, it is a tomb. She let that land. It was well made, and I saw heads in the gallery nod, because it is an easy thing to nod at. The king, my husband, is at the border defending this realm. In his absence, the care of this tower falls to me, and I have taken counsel, and I have here a lawful instrument of the household, she gestured, and the controller lifted the ribbon thing so the seals caught the light, empowering me to set right the colors of my own residence. So, in the king's absence and by the household's authority, and for the dignity of the living, I direct the guard upon the stair to strike the mourning color and take it down with all honor, that the Queen's tower may fly the Queen's arms as a living house should." She looked up at Tam Wren, and she smiled at him and made her voice gentle, and it was the gentleness that was the trap. "You've done nothing wrong, guardsman," she told him softly, so that he had to lean toward her to hear his own doom. "This is a lawful order, sealed by the household, given by your queen. No one will ever say a word against you. Take it down carefully, it deserves care, and fold it, and hand it to the keeper, and go and eat your breakfast and think no more about it. That is all. Strike the color." And I watched the boy's hands tighten on the halyard, and I saw him look for me in the crowd and not find me, and I saw him look at the 3 seals swinging in the controller's hands and count them the way a frightened boy counts, and I understood that he was going to do it, not because he was weak, because everything he could see told him it was lawful, the seals, the ribbon, the queen, the whole nodding gallery. And the one thing that told him otherwise was a piece of vellum in a locked case in a room he could not reach, spoken over by an old flag keeper he had met once at night when he was too frightened to think. The mechanism was working exactly as Cassius had promised it would. She had not needed to break the law. She had only needed to outseal it in front of a boy. Tam Wren cast off the first turn of the halyard. The green field jerked and began to sag from the top of the staff. And a voice came from the back of the forecourt, not loud, but pitched the way a soldier learns to pitch a voice across a parade ground, so that it cut through the crowd's murmur and reached the boy at the top of the stair as clean as a struck bell. "Wren, belay that, make it fast again." It was Corwin Ashe. He came through the crowd, and the crowd gave way to him, because a man who moves with certainty makes a path where none was. He was not in the coal gate rig. He was in his full ceremonial kit, the red wool tunic, the brass, the tall black bearskin, the white gloves, the medals he had earned and never spoke of turned out as if for a state day, immaculate. And I learned later that he had stood the coal gate his whole cold lawful watch through the night, come off it at the proper hour, and then dressed himself in his best in the guard hall and walked to the muster not as a man defying a roster, but as a guardsman coming to a ceremony he had every right to attend. He had broken no order. His watch was ended. He was, in that hour, simply a member of the royal guard standing in a public forecourt in his own uniform. Even in this, he would not give her the small grievance. He gave her only the large refusal. He stopped at the foot of the Colour Stair beside Lord Cassius, and he did not climb it, because it was not his post that morning, and he would not seize what was not his. He simply stood at the bottom of it, in the open, in front of the whole household, and he looked up at the boy with the halyard in his hands. "Wren," he said again, gently now, "make it fast." The boy's eyes went from Ashe to the Queen and back, drowning. "Corwin," he said, and his voice cracked on it, "she says it's lawful. There's seals on it. She says it's a lawful order and I'm to." "I know what she says," Ashe said. "Make it fast, lad, and then you're out of it. Whatever comes after is mine, make it fast." Cassius stepped in front of him, hand on his jeweled belt. "You're off this post, guardsman," he said, low and furious. "You've no standing here. Stand aside or I'll have you dragged aside." And Morwenna turned, at last, from the boy to the man, turned the whole cold weight of herself onto Corwin Ashe, and the forecourt went so quiet you could hear the green field flapping half-struck above us, and she said, in the soft voice that made you lean in to hear your sentence, "You again, of course, the careful man." She looked him up and down, the ceremonial kit, the medals, the immovable calm. "I told you I would come back with the king's word and the law's day, and I have come back with better. I have come back with a lawful instrument of my household and a guard willing to obey it, and all that is left in my way, guardsman, is you. In a uniform you have no right to wear on a post you no longer stand, playing at honor in front of a crowd. So I will give you, once in front of all these witnesses, a direct and lawful command from your queen, and we will all see what you are made of." She lifted her chin. "Stand aside and let the boy do his duty, strike the color. And Corwin Ashe took off his bearskin. I did not understand it at first, and neither did the crowd. There was a murmur, a shifting. But I understood it a moment later, and it went through me like cold water. He took off the tall black bearskin, the mark of a guardsman on duty, and he held it under his arm, and by that one act he set aside the last shred of the household's authority over him. For a guardsman uncovered, off watch in a public place, is not answering a roster or a controller or a consort's instrument. He is only a man and his oath. He had stripped the situation down, deliberately, to the one thing Morwenna could not outseal: a sworn man of the crown, bareheaded before his queen, refusing. Then he answered her, and I have heard it repeated so many hundred times since, by so many mouths, in the guard hall and the lower town and the king's own council, that I am half afraid I no longer remember the exact words, but only the legend of them. But I was there in the front of the crowd, close enough to see the frost on his brass, and I will set it down as he said it, and I will stake my 41 years on its being right. "My lady," he said, and he did not raise his voice so that the whole forecourt strained toward him and grew stiller still to catch it, "I have heard your instrument, and I have counted its seals, and I will tell you what it is. It is a fine paper. It is not a law. The household may order the polishing of a stair and the mending of a rope. It may not unmake a king's ordinance sealed in his own hand, any more than a candle may put out the sun by being lit near it. The color above us flies by the king's word, spoken at the graveside of his queen, that it should stand until his daughter is invested and come down that day to his own hand and to no other. That is the law. Your paper does not touch it. It only wears its coat." "The king is not here," Morwenna said, and for the first time there was an edge under the softness. "I am. His authority in this house is mine while he is gone." "His authority to defend the realm is the regent's, my lady, sealed and lawful," Ashe answered. "And the ordinance is the king's, and neither of those is yours to spend. You have his household, and I honor it. You do not have his ordinance, and I will not let you borrow it." He shifted the bearskin under his arm and looked up once at the sagging green field and then back at her, and he said the thing that echoed. "A queen's color is lowered by death or by the king's own hand, by nothing smaller, not by a controller, not by a household paper, not by a consort in a temper on a cold morning, by death or by the king, and by nothing smaller than those. You are the king's wife, my lady. I have knelt to you, and I will kneel to you again in every lawful thing, but you are not the king, and so the color stays up." He turned from her then, turned his back on the queen, which no one does, and he pitched his voice up the stair to the frightened boy. "Wren, make it fast. On my word and my oath and my name, which I give you freely before all these witnesses to carry, no fault in this is yours. Make it fast and come down." And the boy, 19 years old, with his mother's rent in his mind and 3 seals swinging below him, and a queen's cold face turned up at him, the boy made it fast. His hands were shaking so that it took him 3 tries, but he re-rove the turn and hauled the halyard taut, and the green field of Queen Isolde climbed back up the staff and snapped out full at the top against the white sky, and a sound went through the forecourt that I had never heard at a muster in 41 years. A sort of exhalation, half a gasp and half a cheer, quickly stifled. The sound of a crowd that has watched a small, brave thing and does not quite dare to be caught approving it. Morwenna did not gasp and did not cheer. She stood very still, and the blood had gone out of her face, and I saw her understand quicker than any of us, because she was quicker than any of us, that she had made a terrible mistake. She had staged this. She had filled the galleries and brought the herald and lifted the seals into the light precisely, so that the striking of the flag would be public, lawful seeming, permanent, witnessed. And instead the whole household and the envoys and the lower town at the gate had witnessed a bareheaded guardsman tell the queen to her face that her paper was a coat with no law in it, and had watched the dead queen's color go back up, and had made that stifled sound. She had built a stage for her triumph, and a man had stood on it and said one plain sentence and turned it into a stage for his refusal, and it was too public now to undo quietly. That was the trap of her own cleverness closing on her. She had made it a spectacle, and now the spectacle belonged to him. "Arrest him," she said. Her voice was not soft anymore. "He has laid hands on the discipline of my household. He has incited a guard to disobey a lawful order. He has turned his back on his queen before the whole court. Cassius, arrest him." And Cassius, who had been waiting all his life for a moment when his mother would say those words, stepped forward with his 4 footmen to lay hands on Corwin Ashe. I will tell you what saved him, though saved is not quite the word, because Ashe did not lift a hand to save himself and would not have. What happened was that the crowd, the ordinary household, the stewards and the maids and the guardsmen off watch, and the lower town folk at the gate, did not move aside to let it happen. They did not attack anyone. They were not that kind of crowd, and it was not that kind of morning. They simply closed. They drew in around the foot of the Colour Stair, quiet, shoulder to shoulder, so that Cassius and his 4 footmen found themselves suddenly in a shrinking space, ringed by 100 still faces that were not going to help them and were not going to move. It is a thing that happens sometimes, when a crowd has just seen something true, and it is more frightening to a bully than any weapon, because you cannot arrest 100 people for standing quietly, and you cannot lay hands on one man in the middle of them without the whole thing becoming exactly the kind of ugly public scene that a paper with 3 seals was supposed to avoid. Cassius stopped. He looked to his mother, and Morwenna, who could read a room better than anyone in that palace, read this one and knew that if she pressed it, if she made her son drag a bareheaded, mettled guardsman through a silent, closing crowd on the very morning he had spoken so plainly, she would not be arresting a man. She would be making one. She would hand the whole city a martyr and a sentence to remember, and the sentence was already loose among them. I could hear it starting low near the gate, by nothing smaller. By nothing smaller. Into that frozen moment, and I have thanked God for the timing of it every day since, though I have also come to think it was not entirely chance, came the sound of horses. Not a household party. A great many horses, hard-ridden and horns at the outer gate, and the particular ordered thunder of a royal escort coming in at speed. Word ran up the forecourt from the gate faster than the riders themselves. The king was come home. He had settled the border matter in half the expected time, a river crossing agreed, a treaty sworn, and had ridden the last 2 days almost without sleep to be home, and he had come in, by the plainest chance or the plainest providence, at the exact hour of the dawn muster, into the exact forecourt where his wife stood white-faced beneath his dead first wife's flag with her son's hand halfway to a guardsman's collar, and 100 silent witnesses ringed around them. King Alaric rode into the forecourt on a lathered horse, travel-stained, gray with tiredness, and reined in hard at the edge of the crowd, and the crowd went down before him like grass before wind, and he looked at the whole tableau, the queen, the sagging then risen flag, the bareheaded guardsman with his bearskin under his arm, the son with his hand out, the ring of still faces, and being no fool, and having governed men for 30 years, he did not shout and did not draw and did not demand. He said into the enormous silence, in a voice cracked with the road, "What is being done here under my wife's tower?" And 100 people who had just watched the answer all turned, without meaning to look at Corwin Ashe. But it was not Ashe who spoke first. It was Morwenna, and she moved fast, because she understood that whoever told the king the story first would own it. "My lord," she said, and the softness was back, and the warmth, and a hurt she summoned from somewhere that would have convinced me if I had not seen the last hour. "Thank God you are home. There has been a disorder. I gave an ordinary instruction for the care of my own tower, a lawful household matter, and this guardsman, who is not even on duty here, who is off his post, incited the watch to defy me, turned his back on me before the whole court, and has raised this crowd against your son. I ask only that you restore order in your own house." It was very well done. Every word of it was shaped true enough to pass. And I saw the king's tired eyes move from her to Ashe, and I was afraid, because a king 2 days without sleep who comes home to find his wife weeping of disorder does not always stop to count seals. King Alaric looked at the guardsman a long moment. You turned your back on the queen. I did, my lord, Ashe said. He did not soften it. To give a lawful word to the boy on the stair before a wrong could be done that could not be undone. I have no excuse for the discourtesy but the necessity, and I will answer for the discourtesy however you judge it. And the rest of it, the instruction for the care of the tower. And here Ashe did the thing that I think, of all the things he did that season, was the truest to what he was. He did not defend himself. He did not lay out his case, or plead the ordinance, or name Morwenna's scheme. He simply told the king where the truth was kept, and trusted it to be enough. My lord, he said, I am a guardsman, and it is not my place to argue the law of your house in your own forecourt. But the law of this color is written down. It is in the roll of colors in the keeper's hand, sealed in green wax with your own seal, spoken by you at the queen's graveside 2 years ago. I have only stood on it. Send for the keeper and the roll, my lord, and let the ordinance speak for itself, and judge me by what it says. If it says I am wrong, and I will take what wrong men take. But send for the roll. The keeper is here, I said, and my voice shook, but I got it out, and I pushed forward through the crowd. I am here, my lord, and I can have the roll before you in the time it takes to climb to my room and back. The king looked at me, he knew me. I had raised his flags for 30 years, and something in his tired face settled. Fetch it, he said. And then a cool, clear voice spoke from the edge of the forecourt, and Princess Adela rode in on a plain horse with 2 of her own people behind her. For word of the king's return had reached the old court, and the regent had come to give up her commission to her brother in the proper way, and had arrived in time to hear the last of it. There is no need to fetch it, brother, she said, and she drew from her saddlebag the very case, for she had asked me 2 days before to leave the roll in her keeping in the old court, where Morwenna could not reach it, and I had done it and half forgotten in my fear. The keeper brought the roll to me 2 days ago, when the queen's household first moved against this color, and I have kept it safe as regent. I have read the ordinance. I found it good and lawful and told the keeper so. And I will tell you now, before all these people, what I would have told you in private tonight when I gave your realm back into your hands. That in your absence your wife's household drew up a paper claiming to empower the striking of this color, and that the paper is worth nothing against your ordinance, and that a guardsman and a flag keeper and a frightened boy have spent 3 days holding your own law up for you while you were at the border, which is more than I was able to do without unsheathing the regency against your wife, and I chose not to do that, and I will answer to you for that choice too. She swung down and put the case in her brother's hands. King Alaric opened it there in the forecourt in the gray dawn light, with the whole household watching, and he read the ordinance he had spoken 2 years before over the grave of the woman he had loved first. I watched his face as he read it. I had raised his flags for 30 years, and I had never once seen him weep, and he did not weep then, but something moved in him that was close kin to it, and when he lifted his head his voice had changed. I remember speaking these words, he said. I remember meaning them. By my own hand on the day of my daughter's investiture, and by no other hand and on no other day. He rolled the vellum closed. Then he turned to Morwenna, and I will not pretend it gave me any pleasure, because whatever she was his wife, and he did not enjoy it either. You did not have the power to strike this color, he said quietly, so that it was between them even in front of everyone. Not as consort, not in my absence, not with 100 seals. No one in this realm had that power but me, because I kept it to myself on purpose at her grave, so that it could never be spent by anyone's temper, mine least of all. You knew the ordinance existed. You went around it with a paper. That is not the care of a tower. That is the theft of a law, and you did it in my house while I was defending yours. He let that sit. I am not going to shame you before the city, because you are my wife and the mother of my house. But you will withdraw the instrument publicly this morning, and this color will fly untouched until the day it was always meant to come down, and you will not go near the Colour Stair again." Morwenna was, whatever else, a survivor. She inclined her head 1 degree, no more, and she said, in a voice from which every trace of the soft warmth had gone, leaving only the iron underneath that I had always suspected was the truth of her, "As my lord commands." And she gathered her son and her controller and her ribboned paper and went into the tower, and the great doors closed behind her, and that, though she and Corwin Ashe would cross paths again in the years after, in other quarrels I may set down another day, that was the end of the matter of the color. The king turned last to Ashe. The guardsman still stood bareheaded, his bearskin under his arm at the foot of the stair. "You turned your back on my wife," the king said. "I did, my lord." "Cover yourself, guardsman, and stand straight, and hear me." Ashe set the bearskin back on his head and came to attention, and the king looked at him for a long moment in the gray light. "There is a discourtesy in what you did, and I will not pretend there is not, and a lesser king would fix on it, because it is the easy thing to see. But I have been a soldier longer than I have been a king, and I know the difference between a man who forgets his manners and a man who spends his manners to keep his oath. You spent yours. You stood 3 days between my dead wife's honor and a paper, off your post, out of favor, with nothing in your hands but a law you trusted me to remember. You trusted me to be the king I was at that graveside. Most men would have counted the seals and struck the flag and slept easy. You counted the law." He paused. "What did you say to her, at the last? They are already saying it at my gate. I heard it as I rode in. Say it to me." And Ashe said it again, plainly, without relish, the way he said everything. "A queen's color is lowered by death or by the king's own hand, by nothing smaller. She is the king's wife. She is not the king." The king nodded slowly. "By nothing smaller," he repeated. "Yes." He looked up at the green field of Isolde, snapping full and bright at the top of the staff against the white sky where it had flown every day for 2 years and would fly now until the day it was meant to. "See that it is carved," he said, to no one and to all of us, "over the Colour Stair. Not his name, he would not thank me for his name. The words, so that the next boy who stands that post at 19 with a queen at the bottom of the stair and 3 seals in his face has one true sentence carved over his head where he cannot help but read it. It is carved there now. You can go and see it. A single line cut into the lintel over the top of the Colour Stair in the Queen's Tower where the keeper's work and the guard's work meet. By nothing smaller. Just those 3 words, because everyone in this palace knows the rest of the sentence by heart, and the 3 words are enough to bring the whole of it back: the gray dawn, the sagging flag, the bareheaded man, the queen going white. It is the first thing a new guardsman is shown when he comes to that post, and the last thing an old one touches when he leaves it, and it has, in the 2 years since, become the byword of the whole household for the one thing this palace is finally proud of. That here, a color, a law and honor is not lowered by anyone's temper or convenience or clever paper, but by death or by the king, and by nothing smaller than those. Corwin Ashe went back to the Colour Stair the next morning. The roster that had sent him to the river Colgate was quietly torn up. The king saw to that himself, and to a good deal else in the ordering of the household in the weeks after he came home. Tam Wren was not turned out. Ashe would not hear of it and stood surety for the boy himself, and Wren serves in the guard to this day, steadier than most, because a man who has once been given his honor back at 19 tends to hold on to it with both hands ever after. I keep the roll of colors still, in my room under the leads, and I am too old now to climb the tower stairs without stopping twice, and one of these seasons soon they will find a younger keeper, and I find I do not mind, because I know what will be carved over the stair long after I am folded away myself. There is one more thing to tell, and then I am done, because it is the thing that makes the rest of it worth the telling. The Princess Ilara was invested last spring. She is a woman now, grave and clever as her mother was, and she came of age and took her mother's honors and her mother's rooms in the Queen's Tower, and on the morning of her investiture there was a ceremony at the Colour Stair that the whole city came out to see. King Alaric climbed the tower stairs himself slowly, for he is not young either, and stood on the landing where Corwin Ashe stands, and gave the order at last in his own voice that the ordinance had waited 2 years to hear. And Corwin Ashe cast off the halyard gently, with the care he gives all colors, and the green field of Queen Isolde, the white hart, the border of small gold stars, came down the staff for the last time, slow and full and honored, into the king's own 2 hands, exactly as he had sworn at her graveside it would, and by no smaller hands than those. And then it was folded, by the keeper and the guard together the way it must be, and given to Alara, who held her mother's color against her and did not try to hide her face, and the crowd in the forecourt made no stifled sound this time but a great open one, because there was nothing in this to be afraid of approving. And then Corwin Ashe bent the new color to the line, Alara's own, that I had sewn myself that winter, green still for her mother, but with the young princess's own device upon it, and ran it up the staff, and it broke out full at the top against a soft spring sky, and the Queen's Tower flew a living color at last, raised in honor and not stolen in a temper, which is the whole and only difference, and the difference a guardsman had stood 3 cold days in the dead of winter to keep. I stood at the bottom of the stair for that, an old man with wet eyes, and I looked up past the flag at the 3 carved words over the landing, and I thought about a windy afternoon 2 years gone, and a queen with her gloves off, and a man who did not move. By nothing smaller. It is the truest thing I know, and I have given my whole life to flags. A color is a word made visible, and the word this palace flies now, over everything, higher than any arms, is that word, that here the things that matter are not lowered by the loud or the clever or the powerful in a hurry, but only ever by nothing smaller than death or the king himself. One guardsman put that word into the air on a cold morning, and it has never come down.